Research Team 396 focuses on addressing barriers that impede industry leaders from adopting modularization techniques. Their research offers a comprehensive assessment of the project benefits associated with modularization and provides a two-part tool to assist industry leaders in this regard. By utilizing this tool, industry leaders can make well-informed decisions, optimize their modularization approach, and align it with ESG considerations, leading to improved project outcomes. Here to present, please welcome Cathy Farina, Michael Kluck, Lina Gonzalez, and Jin Choi.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. What a conference so far. It's been great. We've got lots of presentations on our current research teams and some great keynotes. And what a great panel on that decarbonization. So we're the last research team to present today, and we're going to talk about modularization. Are you experienced? So you're probably wondering why this album cover is what has to do with our research at CII. But before I get into that, what we're looking at is Jimi Hendrix's debut album that he released in 1967, Are You Experienced? It was an immediate commercial success with its innovative approaches to the electric guitar and songwriting. It really was a step change in the music industry. And what we want to talk about today is making a step change in the construction industry with the implementation of modularization on capital projects that has been around for over 50 years. It is a proven solution to reduce project risk that is really critical for project success. There's also a tie between ESG and modularization that is getting more and more critical for both the owners and for the contractors. So we want our research to be a step change in changing from hearing about modularization to really understanding why and when you'd want to implement modularization on your projects. So there's lots of innovative technologies to improve productivity on projects and efficiency, but we believe modularization really is that most promising method that has been proven to improve project productivity and efficiency on projects. And when modularization is really properly implemented and there is an early decision to modularize, projects can save 12.5% in schedule savings and 19.2% in cost savings. And that's when compared to a traditional stick-built project. And over the past 40 years, CII has conducted 5 major modularization research efforts and 16 modular-related research efforts. And then there's been other diverse research teams on, say, capital efficiency, lean, standardization, productivity, constructability, that really have stated modularization as one of the key solutions for projects. Yet, we're still not getting it correct. And we believe it's because that research to implementation link is not there. So while far from being new or complicated, the modularization strategy really still is not understood. We're not properly planning, or we're not executing very effectively. And this may be because of late decision to modularize, or not properly planning for modularization on your project. So a business case for modularization is really needed to understand the business drivers, the modularization concept, and the key cost, schedule, and other benefits modularization can bring to your project. The business case will really set the stage to properly plan, execute, and design your modularization project. Hence, RT-396, the Business Case Analysis Guide for Industrial Modularization. We had a variety of owners, contractors, service providers, and academics that had on an industry average of 23 years experience, but all with modularization experience. And we have some of them on stage here today, but we also have some in the audience, and I just wanted to thank them. Thank all of our research team for their input and their expertise into our tools and our guide that will really help companies set up that business case. So thank you. So before we dive into the research, we wanted to define what is modularization. And modularization is an execution strategy which transfers work from the project site to an off-site location for improved project performance. And we also wanted to define some key terminologies that relate directly to modularization, such as off-site construction, which is really moving labor from the site location to an off-site location in a controlled environment. And part of off-site construction, we had three other kind of terms that we wanted to define, and one of them is prefabrication. And that's really taking material and combining it together to create a larger component, such as piping spools, structural frames, prefabricated equipment or vessels. The second one being pre-assembly. And that's really taking the prefabricated components and combining them together to create more of a larger section. Some examples of that would be pre-assembled structures or stair towers, multi-discipline structures or stair towers with, say, electrical lighting on them, or dressed vessels or dressed equipment, which is really the equipment with its auxiliaries on it, like ladders, platforms, piping, electrical, and instrumentation. And then the third one, the most complex, is that module assembly. And that's really taking your prefabricated components, your pre-assemblies, and assembling them into a larger structural frame, so within a structural frame, to create a section. Examples are pre-assembled racks, pre-assembled units, vendor package units, and pre-assembled buildings. So our essential research question was, when is the appropriate time for modularization planning, and how should a company develop the business case to support the modularization decision? And our goal was really to provide industry with a simple, easier approach to identify and capture those reduced capital costs and other benefits modularization brings to your project. Our scope was the heavy industrial sector, but we believe we actually can apply this to other sectors as well. Oh, went too fast there. So our 5 modularization solutions that we developed as part of the research were modularization timing, the business case analysis tool 1 and tool 2, our ESG modularization assessment tool, and our modularization barrier breakers. So our first one being modularization timing. And for this, we did a survey amongst all the CII members. And really what we were looking at is what is the current, we wanted to understand the current implementation of modularization on capital projects. So out of the 126 member companies, 40 companies participated in the survey. And one of the questions that we asked was, does your company have an established modularization business case process, framework, or model that analyzes the optimal extent of modularization to maximize benefits? And out of the 40 companies, 45 of us responded yes. So there is some improvement needed. And that's what our tools and our research team developed, is they're going to help with helping companies develop that business case, process, or framework. So now I'm going to get you guys to get your phones out. We have a Menti exercise. So if you can scan the QR code, or you can go to menti.com and enter the code. But we're going to ask you, when do you think the first modularization business case analysis should be considered? We got a list of kind of phases up there: the opportunity of framing, which is before FEL 1, the assessment or FEL 1, selection or FEL 2, or the basic design or FEL 3. So I don't know if I see any phones still up. Hopefully everyone scanned the code. And just pick one of those phases. And now if we can go to the results. Okay, so we got, yeah, so we're kind of seeing the results come in still, but we still got the opportunity framing and the assessment. And then before FEL 1, this is great. So the majority of it, there's some in selection, some in basic design, but the majority is in that opportunity and framing and assessment. Which is good news. If we can now go back to the slides, and I'll show you why. We'll compare it to the survey that we did in 2023. Okay, so on the right-hand side here, I think, yeah, right-hand side, you'll see the survey that we did in 2023. And it was 92% of us really said, it's going to be in the assessment phases or the opportunity and framing phase. And that's a significant improvement to what you can see on the left-hand side, which is a survey we asked as part of RT-396, and that was 10 years ago. So it's good news. This is good news. Because next we're going to talk a little bit about timing. I'll go over here a little bit. So some of you may have recognized this from RT-283's best practice, planning for modularization. It is a curve that you may have seen slightly similar before. However, what we've done is we've updated it with key modularization activities to ensure that optimum modular solution. So what we would recommend is that business case and decision to modularize, you want to do it as early as possible in the opportunity and framing phase. And that is kind of indicated right here, and you can see the maximum benefits. Why do we want to do it early? So typically that is going to be done in the owner's organization as well. So why do we want to do it early? It's really because the earlier you do, there is going to be some key decisions and assumptions the project is going to make that may impact the optimal amount of modularization in your strategy. And so the earlier you do it, the more optimum you can be in your modularization strategy. So as you can see, there's a gray curve here. And as it goes down, oh, I'm going to be pointing on you. Hopefully I'm not pointing on your guys' heads. But as it goes down there, you can see the decrease in benefits, so the maximum and minimum of modularization benefits that you can see on your project. So as that gray curve goes through the project life cycle, goes through the phases, when the decision to modularize is later in the project phases, the decrease in benefits you'll see from your modularization. So I'm going to go through some of the activities. So earlier on in your assessment phase, the project's making some key decisions. They're looking at different options around your site location and your infrastructure requirements. And some of these decisions may impact your amount of modularization you can do. So that would be around the assessment phase. And when you're going through the assessment phase, now you're looking at your different options, and you get near the end of the assessment phase, the selection phase, and that's where you're going to be selecting. You're going to go down to one option. So you're going to be going down to one site option, and you're going to have your infrastructure requirements decided on. So if you make the decision to modularize at the end of the assessment phase and at the beginning of the selection phase, you're going to have a drop in benefits in that optimum modular solution. So you're going to have a little drop because now you're going down to one single selection. The selection phase here is where you're going to have your module concept developed and finalized. And at the end of the selection phase, you start your modular execution and design strategy. You're going to start to develop that, and then that's where some of your execution decisions are going to start to get locked in and frozen. So if you make the decision to modularize near the end of the selection phase, you're going to further drop in flexibility and a drop in benefits from that modularization can bring your project. And you can see that with that little drop there. Now, if you're making, I'm not going to use the pointer now because I don't want to hit any of my colleagues up here. So if you make it the decision modularized near the end of the basic design, you really have little flexibility in changing to implement modularization on your project without some design or some execution and design recycle. But that doesn't mean you can't do it. It doesn't mean you can't implement modularization in your project that late in the project lifecycle. It just means you're going to have a schedule impact, and you really need that management decision in that business case to evaluate the value of modularizing that late in the project lifecycle. So really what we want to say is really decide, when you're deciding to modularize, do it early. And you're going to get the maximum benefits modularization can bring to your project with that optimum modular solution. I'm now going to go and pass it over to Michael to talk about the Business Case Analysis Tool 1.
Hey, thank you, Cathy. Before I get into it, a couple of things about modularization that you've already heard. It's not new, and it's not rocket science. A couple of presenters before, they talked about modularization that they did in the 80s. This CII started in 1983. The first module study, if you happen to notice, was 1987. I don't know how many research studies have been done, but as Cathy mentioned, it's the gap between the research and the actual implementation. That's the first point I want to make. The second point I want to make is, in talking with different people, they're not really interested in reading 100, 150, or 200-page research effort. They would like to see a tool that they can pick up and use with minimal extra effort. So with those things in mind, we developed 2 tools, and Lina will talk about the ESG tool later. So we have 3 tools that are basically set with the same format. So before I blast through these tools in the few minutes that I have, I want to just point out that this is not an eye test. And what we're trying to show is that we have built into the tools drop-down menus, explanations, so after you read the instruction page, you can actually go through it without a whole lot of foreknowledge and understand, okay, the reason I picked this is because this, and why is that important to the modularization effort. So the next upcoming slides I'm going to talk about is we just tried to distill it down into the key factors that make modularization decisions different. And I'll go through those, then I'll go through the tools. So if you can read it, good for you. My eyes aren't nearly that good. So where do we use this tool? As Cathy pointed out, we use it in opportunity framing. Now, for all you clients, that's where you haven't brought the contractor in yet, or probably not. So you need to have an internal module guidance person to help you get through that portion of it, because there are a lot of decisions that are made very early on that can't be undone by the time you get to assessment, where you're looking at different options, or selection and you pick the option. So this very first early tool is to try an easy thing to determine whether or not your project might gain from modularization. So we identified 12 modularization drivers. The first one, cost, or the economic productivity factor, which is the all-in wage rate times the productivity factor of the craft at the site and also at the mod yard. That difference is the cost, the money that fuels the modularization effort. The second big elephant in the room is always schedule. And the schedule is important. What's neat about a module job is you're giving it to a company that runs like Ford Motor Company. You give them the data, they spit it out the other way. The only way to mess it up is if you, as the contractor or client, don't give them the right data. So it's called schedule surety. Those are the 2 big things you look at. The other things that are impacted by it are weather, the laydown ratio at the site, labor availability, HSE, quality performance, brownfield, and of course, environmental, social, government, ESG factors. There are 6 additional things that we picked up and we put into this first tool that aren't readily considered. Local labor content often drives how you split the work. Access to project site, modular team experience, and yes, the client needs a person and the contractor needs one. Flexibility on pre-funding investment decisions. This is where, because the module needs to be built earlier, you may have to do some engineering before you get FID, or financial investment decision. Project or program repeatability, the holy grail of modularization called standardization. And then finally, existing engineering and design standards. You have to adjust your design standards just a little bit because you're now doing things like putting pumps under piping. You're building it a little different, the configuration is different, so you need to be flexible. So finally, my blast through the tool number one. All the tools start out with a purpose and a scope. It also identifies where you ought to use it. And one thing I'd like to say about all these tools is they're easy to use, they're repeatable, you don't need all the information when you go through it the first time, and you can do it at any phase in the project. The point is not that you start at the right time, it's not that you have the right information, it's that you go through it and you understand what the critical information is to make a decision. So after you go through that, we get the tool instructions, not too bad, 12 of them, and then we go to the next page. The first thing we do is we identify with a drop-down menu, see if it's working, yeah. You pick from an input. You don't have a whole lot of things to select from, usually 2 or 3 items. And here's a spoiler alert. If it's green, it's going to tell you go to tool 2. So you're already there now. But tool 2, this says you already have something in your project that could benefit from modularization. The yellow indicates that that particular driver is not a distinguishing factor. So you go through all 12 of those. The second page is the other 6 considerations that I showed on that little chart. And again, you go through those, you select yes or no. It gives you a range, an impact, and details about the impact. So after you go through all of those, as you said, for this particular job, we have to go to tool 2, so you got to listen to me a little longer. But we did a validation. It was tough doing a validation on some of this because it's hard to get companies to give out enough data to actually go through the details. But we had 7 stick-built jobs and 9 modular jobs. The average of modular, the 12 items that we talked about earlier, that the modular job actually achieved, was 5.5. The stick-built was 3.5. So obviously the module job was more modular than the stick-built, but it begs the question, with the stick-built, with 3.5 modularization factors, did they leave some money on the table in terms of cost and schedule? Could they have done something a little different? We think so. Modular case number 2. Again, this is the 1-2 punch. Again, you can start this earlier, right underneath module tool number 1, but we prefer that it be started in assessment because it's asking more quantitative answers. The first tool was qualitative. The second tool is asking for numbers and figures, and typically you don't have that just in opportunity framing or what I call FEL0. FEL1 or 2, you start getting some numbers. But again, the point of this tool is you need to go through it and learn what those are, and as you don't have to fill them all in, but you start filling them in as you get it. We divided the modules, you know, always there's a big discussion about pre-assembly, prefabrication, and modules. We divide into 3 aspects: small, medium, and large. The reason we did that is because these 3 define how you're going to build it, how you're going to ship it, where it can go, and how you're going to set it. As an example, small is truckable and liftable. Medium is truckable, maybe, liftable, maybe, and large is not truckable and not liftable. So we don't get into the details, but based on that, we then said, well, what's the maximum percentage you can modularize? So we looked at 2 options. The bottom one is stick-built, and you can put boxes around a stick-built layout. We do not recommend that, but we put it there because people do it. We have a modular layout where you actually move the equipment around and into the areas where the equipment plays well together, as one of my pipers used to say. Again, we broke it into small, medium, and large, and then the percentages. As you can see, as you go to larger from the small and medium, you get a higher percent of modularization because you actually put more of the equipment in the fab yard, which allows you to put more of the EI and C together, do the pre-commissioning, and if you have fluids you're fortunate enough to have over there, you can actually do some of the commissioning. So you want all the equipment that plays well together in the same box. The stick-built layout will never be as high because all your equipment is now running to the pipe rack, running this way, and then running back up to more equipment. So you'll never get the percentage of modularization as high as you would if you just rearrange the equipment. So based on that, sort of in summary, the key factors to consider in a module job is cost and savings. We beat those. Risk, contingency benefits, which is schedule surety from the fab yard. A reduced site footprint, which is important. And then a bunch of other benefits we didn't list. There are some costs that are associated with it. Module transportation and logistics. This is a big box you're shipping now. You need a big vessel to do it. It takes a little extra money. You have land transportation costs of moving that particular box up to the site. You have an extra amount of steel because you're now building a box rather than just putting it in the ground. You have the MOF, the material offloading facility, or the dock as a wharf, as some people call it. You have a construction management team at the site, at the fab yard, which is a little different. On a stick-built, you wouldn't have that group there. The engineering cost of modularization, I'm an engineer, so I always argue that a little bit. I think it costs more from an engineering standpoint because we give them more to do. They now have to interface with logistics, the fabrication yard, procurement, and a bunch of other people that they normally wouldn't deal with, and then some other costs. But if you see, the expected cost is way less than the expected savings, and that's the optimal, what you want. So going through analysis 2, again, the same thing. It's set up the same. The scope, where you should be using it, although I'd push it as far over as we could. And then a few more instructions for this one, since it is quantitative instead of qualitative, and some color code on what cells you can fill out and what you shouldn't fill out. And you start with the next one. The next one, we have the information stage. Again, we're recommending that you use this iterative. So you're going to have to keep track of the different iterations you use. It doesn't take that much, and there's a whole bunch of iterations you can do before you should be able to come up with the optimal solution. So label them correctly. We go to module yard selection page. This is probably the most important page because we talk about the all-in wage rate times the productivity factor. And we set that up for the fab yard, and we set it up for all the fab yard that we're looking at and the project site. So what we do, and that requires your input. And you say, well, I don't know where that is. They have periodicals that give you that. You can get that through all your estimating, any of your estimating groups within your company has that. You look at that, the tool goes ahead and identifies what is identified as economic productivity ratio, which is the combination of the two. It ranks and rates them, 1 to 6 in this case. And then on the bottom is a qualitative analysis of the fab yard. We look at things like safety record, quality, access to the ocean, other factors, and we give them just a numerical number because this allows us on, okay, I can't remember what number 6 was with respect to safety, but when I went through it, these guys were better. And so in this case, as you see on the two right-hand sides, they had a lot of 4s and 5s, so we said we're not going to analyze them, we're just going to use the first 3. So this is the reason for that. You go to the next page, the module concept page. Again, this is where you pick the type of module you're going to use, and this is dependent on where the fab yard is and where the site is. Is it across the ocean? Is it on the same land continent? Is it big or small? How far away it is? It has drop-down menus that you pick for how far away you are, what you're looking at, other things, transportation constraints, etc. I'm not going to go through all of them. But if you can't remember what the restrictions are for a particular concept, then you can go to this drop-down, click on this tab here, and it gives you the different sizes from small to large, and it gives you the restraints. You come back, you select a size, then you look at your required dock and your required road, and then you go to the next one. Hello? Okay. The percent modularization, this is always, everybody asks about this, so we gave you 2 methods to do this. One of them is you use our research, which basically you select the type of module strategy. Is it just stick-built? Are we just pre-dressing a few things? Are we going to look at something else? Or are we going to do a full modules? You select on that, and you go up to the upper right, and it gives you a review, a quick review of what I went over earlier. Okay, this is the percent of you can expect from these different types of modules and these type of layouts. You come back here, based on that and your constraints that you did previously, you say, well, I think all I can get away with is a small module. So you pick small module, it dumps the 12 to 20%, and then it gives you the flexibility of putting in what you want. In this case, we picked 20. So the second one is where you actually know the subgroups within your process, you know the work hours associated with it, and you think you have a good idea of the percentage for modularization. So you put those two together, and you end up populating it with an overall composite percent modularization. And then at the bottom of that page, you get to pick whether you want to use the RT-396 numbers or your own numbers, and you put them in there for the calculation of the TIC costs. What that looks like is the total page here, and what the completed input section looks like is this right here. Some of these you have to put numbers for. We put in there safety. Put a number in for safety. You know it's safer to build it, and if you don't put a number in there, you don't actually are able to realize the benefits of the modularization, and you may get a bad comparison. So we sort of push you to go into some of those soft numbers. Finally, the output page, again, it summarizes all we have. This box here talks about the all-in wage rate times productivity factor, and it gives us the strategy and what kind of modularization we're doing. And then it goes into details on the cost for the stick-built portion of that module scope versus the fabrication cost of that particular module scope, and it gives you a difference. With the other information you put into the previous section, you can come up with the total installed cost difference. It then automatically selects what scenario is the best, and then it gives you a quick little simple graph that says stick-built at the top, module at the bottom. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Lina, who will talk about ESG.
Thank you, Michael. So, faced with regulatory, shareholder, and stakeholder pressure, nowadays our industry is beginning to realize that we need to start assessing environmental, social, governance impact in our projects. On that, our RT-396 team has developed an ESG modularization tool that will help us understand and assess what ESGs are in the early assessment of projects. This, together with Tool 1 and 2, it'll help us understand what is the optimal execution strategy for your project, while understanding if modularization and the level of modularization has an impact on your ESGs. So, how does this tool work? We have 42 ESG factors that we have identified that have a positive benefit while assessing a modularization execution strategy. This means that modularization will either mitigate or reduce your ESG impact. You will also have 7 neutral factors that will determine that your modularization execution strategy might have either a neutral or a higher ESG impact. Out of all those 49 factors, we have split them into 3 main categories: environmental, social, and governance. And within those 3 buckets, we have subcategories to help you understand what is the higher mitigation that your project can have. In this specific example here, we see that medium modularization execution strategy will be the one that deals the biggest mitigation measures associated to your ESGs. So how does this tool work? As Michael explained for Tool 1 and 2, we have the introductory page where it has all of the instructions to help you understand how to properly utilize this tool. Once you have thoroughly read these instructions, you can move to the project information page. As always, make sure that you have who is evaluating your project, at what timestamp of your project you're evaluating your ESGs, your project name and location. As we had said before, this tool can be used across the project life cycle, so it is good to always have a timestamp of when you're assessing these mitigation measures. So once you have that, what is the next step? You go to your weighing table. This tool has already predetermined the weights for all of your 49 ESG factors. However, based on your project needs, your project goals, and your company goals and standards, you can modify these goals to address or understand which of these categories or subcategories has the biggest impact or mitigation possibilities to your project. Once you do that, it'll allow you to then modify your weighing table, and you can move on to the next tab. In this tab, you will start assessing your positive factors. Here, the key thing is to understand how does each execution strategy impact or mitigate your ESG scoring. So you will start assessing all of these factors for a stick-built or low modularization strategy, medium modularization strategy, or your high modularization strategy. Once you have filled out this sheet, it'll have various colors, and it'll start calculating the different scores associated to each of your parameters. Once you do this, you can go on to the next page, that is your neutral factors. Same as before, you will start assessing all of these factors associated to your 3 execution strategies. Once that is completed, the tool will gather this information together with the weighing scores that you have provided previously for each of your categories and subcategories and provide you with an overall result. So this is, again, an example of how your tool would look like. Once you're done with that, you would go to your summary page, and it'll start providing you with all those scoring. Which execution strategy actually yields the best mitigation for you associated to your environmental factors, your social factors, your governance factors, and your overall scoring. It'll also provide you the assessment of your neutral or higher impact negative factors. Why is this important? Because some projects don't have either the resources or the time to address all of these mitigation measures associated to ESGs. So with this summary sheet, your team can determine which are your low-hanging fruits that will actually help and benefit your execution strategy, but will actually have a higher mitigation impact to your project when you're talking about ESGs. So what did we do to validate this tool? We went out to 9 industrial projects within sand oil, gas projects, natural gas, other heavy industry projects, and they provided us with their scores associated to this tool. As seen here, most of these projects yielded that a high modularization execution strategy would be yielding the best mitigations for their ESGs. Together with that, what did they do is provide us information and feedback stating that with all this new information around these 49 factors, they were able to have more information in their early assessment around ESGs that would help them decide what was the best execution strategy for their project. So on that note, I'll pass it to Lina to finish with modularization barriers and close out this presentation.
All right, thank you, Lina. The next solution is modularization barrier breakers. We have identified 31 modularization barriers through extensive literature review and brainstorming session, and then distributed the surveys to CI member companies to better understand the current implementation of modularization and barriers in capital projects. Based on our survey result, the overall top 5 modularization barriers are requirements of early scope and design freeze, vendor data is not available to support modularization, not compelling business case, Modularization is not part of project design. And lastly, project delivery method prevents effective implementation of modularization planning and execution. We also investigated the difference between owners and contractors. Besides the barriers that has been listed in the overall top barriers that was listed in the previous slide, or the one in the middle, owners have uniquely selected the barriers related to lack of modularization assessment capability, logistic or transportation, or modularization knowledge, process, or guide. Whereas contractors have selected the barriers uniquely related to a lack of business drivers. To address these barriers, we have provided multiple modularization barrier breakers and details per barrier. And the details can be found more in our report. Among all, we have identified that these are the top barriers that have often came up. First, the industry needs to plan, design, and execute modularization early and properly. Industry needs easy guides and tools. And industry needs to shift their paradigm from stick-built to modular to standard modular. And lastly, we have to thoroughly educate the industry leaders, students, and academics. And thus, our research team has addressed all of them in our research. Now, it's time to wrap up. We have provided multiple solutions to help you and your company to successfully execute the modular strategy appropriately and timely, which is early, to gain maximum benefits of modularization. And those are standardized modular definitions, recommended timing, modularization barrier breakers, business case analysis tool 1 and tool 2, and lastly, ESG modularization assessment tool. Used together with our research, the combination defines the best modularization execution strategy that help you to achieve the maximum benefits. And that will lead to the path of successful execution along with the combination, along with the relation between modularization and ESG factors. Although we have provided multiple solutions to help you and your company to execute modular projects successfully, we think we only address 3 topics out of 20 advanced modularization planning requirements. We hope to see the follow-up research in the near future to tackle the rest of the topics to advance the current modularization planning, design, and execution to the next level. Now, it's time to act. Please implement modularization appropriately and timely. Support our advanced modularization planning guide. Industry needs it. Download our tools from conference app or knowledge base. We are planning to deliver a free webinar on how to use our tools in detail on October. Once the date is confirmed, CII will let you know. If you want to learn more about research, please find our knowledge base for more. And if you have further questions after Q&A sessions, please visit us in our VIP area during the cake reception, and we will be there. Before I conclude our presentation, I'd like to thank our research team members for their hard effort. Really, throughout the journey, we had about 38 research team meetings, and their support was phenomenal. I'd like to thank our team members one more time. So, all right, thank you for listening to our presentation. This slide concludes our presentation, and now we'd like to open the floor for questions.
Thank you. A couple questions, very briefly. First question, does the cost saving that you reported there at the beginning consider the investment cost in fabrication yards, cost of logistics, things like that?
Yes, those numbers were was not part of the research, but it was based on the 25 sample case projects that have collected in the past to identify the correlationship between modularization critical subset factors and performance. For that one, I have asked the case project participants to report their cost saving and schedule savings in totals based on the TIC compared to stick build. So,
okay,
yep.
Great. Another question. Many of your images and talking points seemed to apply to heavy industrial modules. So what nuances would you distinguish for buildings, such as an office building or even a manufacturing plant, something a little bit different than the heavy industrial?
Yes, our scope was focused on the heavy industrial sector, but we believe our tools can be used in other sectors as well. Definitely, there are some differences compared to heavy industrial versus light industrial or building sectors. But with a small modification, I believe the tools can be used to help them.
I think the key to that is it's a different planning set of guidelines that you use when you go modular or you do any type of pre-assembly. And it's that process of understanding when you need to supply things to an intermediate such as a fab yard or wherever that is important. And if you throw the industrial module out and put something else in there, I think you'll see that thread runs through that.
Fantastic. Thank you to the research team. One other round of applause, please.